commissioners, please.
Council Liaison Sneddon. Commissioner Keller.
Here.
Commissioner Kameyer.
Here.
Commissioner Cooney.
Here.
Vice Chair Young.
Yes, here.
Chair Davis.
Correct, thank you. Staff, are there any changes to the agenda?
Chair, there are no changes to the agenda.
This is the point for public comment for any member of the public to speak on items within our purview, but not on today's agenda. Does anyone wish to speak?
We have no public comment at this time.
Comment at this time. Very good. Go to item 5, consent items. We have the meeting minutes.
Chair Davis, is your mic on?
It was. Go to item 5, the consent items. This is the meeting, approval of the meeting minutes for April 21st, 2022. Any comments or questions on that item? If not, do I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Commissioner Keller, is there a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Cooney seconded. Could I have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Keller.
Yes.
Commissioner Kameyer.
Yes.
Commissioner Cooney.
Yes.
Vice Chair Young.
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. The minutes are approved unanimously. Takes us to item 6, administrative items. This is the adoption of a resolution implementing a Stage 2 water shortage alert.
Chair Davis, Commissioners, Joshua Hagmark, Water Resource Manager. And we're here today to start a conversation, I should say, continue a conversation from March. We're not looking for an action today, but we are looking for some meaningful input from the Commission as we prepare to bring this item back to you in June and hopefully onto Council for adoption in later June. So today's conversation is, we're trying to keep up with all the changes going on at the state level, and of course we'll provide you an update on where we are water supply wise, but looking for some input as we kind of prepare the community for what looks to be a very, very dry summer ahead statewide. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Corey.
All right, good morning, Chair Davis and Commissioners. My name's Dakota Corey, and I'm the Water Supply Analyst. And as Mr. Hagmark teed us up really nicely, I'm going to be going over our Stage 2 Water Shortage Alert presentation today. This really does feed right off of the presentation that Mr. Hagmark gave in March on our water supply update. So here's an overview of the presentation for today. We'll be doing a brief look at our water supply and demand status as we're going into the summer. Then we're going to do a little bit of an overview of the actions that the governor has taken around the statewide drought, and then the subsequent water board actions that have come in response to some of his executive orders. Then we've got a draft Stage 2 water shortage alert the staff has been working on that we would like to get some feedback from you on today. And finally, we're going to talk about additional actions staff is taking, again, as we head into this dry summer. So first, the update on our water supply and demand status. I changed this graphic up a little bit. I usually show the long historical route, but really what we're talking about right now has to do with the last 11 years or so. So this is rainfall at Gibraltar since 2011. You all know that 2011 is the last time that Kachuma spilled for us, and so that was really kind of our last wet year. And then you can see this series of below average rainfall that we've seen from 2012 on. We did have a couple of wet years in 2017, 2019, and 2020, and that really helped us stretch our supplies and position ourselves for what now is shaping up to be a couple of more dry winters. So you can see 2021 and 2022. We're kind of hitting our new average of 18 inches for 2022, but significantly below the long-term average of 27 inches. And this is a graphic that you're all pretty familiar with at this point, but this is the U.S. Drought Monitor. And you can see across the state that most of the state is classified as either severe or extreme drought. Now, this monitor is based on physical characteristics in the environment, not water supply availability. And so we're looking here at things like stream flow, precipitation, soil moisture content, snowfall. And based on those characteristics, you can see that things are pretty dire in the state of California. If you do zoom in on Santa Barbara County, you can see that most of the county is classified as extreme drought conditions, but right along the coast where we sit, we're slightly less in a severe drought. And again, another familiar graphic, but I think it's just really nice for us to continue to watch these trends. This is our city water demand for a couple of different years. And so the black line that you see at the top is our 2013 actual production. And you can see that on average, our customers are still conserving 25% compared to that 2013, which we define as our pre-drought demand. And then the other lines you see there, it's a gray line, is 2020, and that's what the state is setting as a new baseline. And then the two blue lines are both 2021 and 2022 actuals. And what I want to point out here is you can see that 2020 baseline, there's a dip in demand in March and April. And so it was actually, 2020 was actually a fairly wet year for us, and we had almost all of our rainfall in those few months. And so right now, in the time period we're in, when we're comparing demands against 2020, our demands actually look kind of high because it was wet in 2020, and so people weren't turning on their irrigation systems yet.
We got 16 inches of rain in March and April of 2020, so that's why it looks really skewed.
So as we start comparing ourselves to that 2020 baseline, the numbers are going to look a little high right now, but as we head into the summer, we think that we're going to see a more equivalent comparison. The overall message here is that our citizens have done an extremely great job at continuing to use our water resources efficiently, and we don't want to not take that for granted, or take that for granted.
I just want to point out, there's been some articles, and this is good or bad, there's been some shaming about the fact that California water customers have not been conserving, and this has been part of the issue of comparing it to 2020. 20 was a rather wet year, and so you have people didn't have to turn their irrigation on, where we didn't see any rain in January, February, March, and it just had to start turning irrigations on early. So it's kind of it's not a really good comparison to talk about comparisons to 2020. I do believe, though, we'll start to see our customers follow the 2020 trend line and maybe even exceed that later in the year, but that's kind of the challenge right now.
How does that compare to 2014, 2015, like last time we were in a severe drought?
So last time we were in the severe drought, our lowest demand numbers were actually in 2017, and that's when we issued the lawn watering ban during the summer to combat peak demands. And gosh, I'm trying to pull numbers off of the top of my head right now. Demand that year in 2017 dropped down to about 9,000 acre feet per year, and we're trending at about 10,000 acre feet per year now. So we have seen a slight rebound since that extreme drought period, but nothing like the large scale rebound we would think if we were returning to normal conditions or even new normal conditions after the drought.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to just put it in perspective, just talk about our water conservation is the equivalent of really doubling the desal production that we have right now. That puts into context 2013 and where we are today. It is the equivalent of pretty much doubling desal. So conservation has made a difference, and fortunately for us, we're seeing it's been pretty permanent. So it has made a huge difference.
Okay, so what does this all mean? We put this story together. We're seeing extreme drought statewide. We see excellent conservation amongst our community. As you have seen before, and I have a graph in the next slide to show this visually, the city's water demands can be met for the next 2 years, so through water year 2024, which ends in September 2024, using a combination of supplies from our diverse water supply portfolio. And as you know, we always take an extremely conservative planning approach when we're doing these outlook. And so the idea is that we assume drought conditions are going to continue, and we want to make sure under those conditions we still have enough supplies to meet demand. So visually, what does that look like? Here's a graph that we've all seen many times before. And Commissioner Kemmeyer, this kind of shows visually where those demand levels were in that time period you were asking about. As you know, this graphic, each color on the bars represents a different supply source. We have actual data from 2012 to 2021, and then we're projecting out through water year 2024, and this shows which supplies we'll be using to meet those demands. And so in this year, we anticipate using quite a bit of Cachuma water, We have about 2,500 acre feet stored in Gibraltar, so we plan to utilize that resource. Again, desal has been a really important source for us. And we'll use a little bit of state water and groundwater as well. And then next year, in the next 2 years, we'll be relying on similar sources, although we're not going to count on any state water availability, so that's why you don't see it there. Let's see. This is another graphic that we wanted to put out there, and this is really just to start a conversation that we've probably touched upon, but we want to take it a little bit further. So what's that third year look like? Typically, I would come to you with the water year 2025 projection in the fall. But because we're in such dry conditions, we wanted to kind of start that conversation now. And so what you see here is the bar for water year 2023 and the bar for 2024 are pretty much the same as what was in the previous graph in terms of the supply mix that we're applying to meet those demands. However, I applied some conservation beginning in water year 2023, so that's the purple bar at the top, 8% for 2023, which I think would be very attainable for our group to conserve on top of the conservation that they're already doing. And then in 2024, if we continue to see sort of extreme dry conditions, we would ramp up our conservation ask to 15%. That's going to be a little harder to get to. We're probably looking at some bans around lawn watering at that point. But still, if our supplies are truly, diminishing, we want to be prepared. And then you can see in water year 2025, the red hash mark is the supply gap. So that's kind of the water that we would need to come up with. And there's different ways that we can obtain that water. We could go out on the market and try to purchase water. The other thing that Mr. Hagmark and I were talking about is the assumptions we make when we do this planning. You know, we're assuming no inflows to Kachuma, no inflows to Gibraltar, and no state water. And we know even in this last winter, when things were so dry, we still got 2,500 acre feet at Gibraltar. So if we were to assume we had similar dry conditions for the next couple of years, that pretty much fills that gap by water year 2025. So this is kind of an extreme scenario. It's important for us to plan for those extremes and to start wrapping our heads around what that might look like. But we also kind of have to take that in context of what the real world might produce. Commissioner Kemmeyer?
Thanks. I was wondering also, so you said we're tracking around 10,000 acre feet this year. And so all of these are assuming use above 10,000 acre feet. So what's driving that projected increase in demand?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. The 10,000 acre feet is city demand only. And then these graphs here, this one and this one back here, we also account, you can see in the heading for the water that we're supplying to Montecito Water District. So there's another 1,400 acre feet there. And then the 10,000 acre feet of production is also potable production. And so here when we add in recycled water, then you can see we're creeping back up to those numbers. So it's not really like a projected drive up in demand. It's just accounting for different combination of sources. Our enhanced urban water management plan, which is where these demands are coming from, does anticipate that demands are going to go up over the next couple of years. If you remember, we were anticipating rebound from the last drought, and so there is some expected increased demand, but more it's just a holistic accounting of all of our different supplies.
Got it, thank you.
The pipeline to deliver water to Montecito will be ready by water year 2023?
Yeah, Desal Link, the project that's in construction, the pipeline will be done at the end of this calendar year. The next step, though, is the pump station. So we had to upgrade the pump station, and that is going out to bid soon. A little uncertain about the timing of delivery of that equipment, but anticipating it will be in place by the end of calendar year 2023. At this point, we have plenty of Kachuma water to complete that agreement, so we're not concerned about that at this time.
Mr. Young?
Thank you. So how long can groundwater resume at the level you have projected
So
in 2025? What point then do we lose that?
that's a good question. What I'm showing here in terms of groundwater production in 2022, which isn't on this graph but is on this graph, would be pumping from our storage unit 1 basin, and specifically the wells that feed Ortega groundwater treatment plant. And then we are ramping up to connect Alameda Well to Ortega Groundwater Treatment Plant. So that gives us another source and storage unit 1 starting in next summer. And then we also can start tapping into the Foothill Basin. And so what I'm projecting in this graphic here is pumping 2 wells in Foothill that are good producers, and then 4 wells in storage unit 1 that feed Ortega Groundwater Treatment Plant. And this is a really conservative estimate of production capacity at those wells, considering that the more we pump them, sometimes the less they produce. So we're trying to be really kind of safe and conservative on what the annual amount of water available is. In terms of storage, we estimate that we have, do you remember the number off the top of your head? We have thousands of acre feet, and I don't want to just throw out a number. I want to say we have like 13,000 acre feet total in both basins. That's the number that keeps like flashing in my head, and I think that's correct. But I can also get back to you with a concrete number on that. I'm not pulling it from my head.
We'll definitely bring back that as part of the presentation next month. But I think what's also helpful to keep in mind is as we extract from here, the perennial yield of the basin is around 1,200 acre feet. So there's about 1,200 acre feet of inflows naturally coming into the basin every year. Even during pretty dry conditions, there's still some inflows that are getting into the basin. And so we may, for example, in here it says in 2023, we're taking out approximately 2,000 acre feet from the groundwater, but it's also being charged by about 1,200. So the net change is much smaller. But we can certainly take a look at how this is playing out. This is pretty conservative. We're not hitting our groundwater basin really hard. So I project that this will go out a few more years if need be.
So I thought we were allowing the basins to recharge after years of, extraction. So that doesn't, if we're just pulling out the annual production from inflows, then we're not really allowing it to recharge.
Correct. For the last 3 years, we haven't been pumping at all.
Okay.
So the basin has been recovering.
Okay.
We've seen the downtown basin recovering nicely. It's been looking really good. But yeah, so we'd be basically turning those pumps back on. And so fortunately, we haven't been pumping them for the last few years. So we are in a good spot to restart pumping.
So what percent of their recovery are they at?
It's difficult. So our basins are two different basins, and they're so different. So we have storage unit 1, which underlies downtown, and it is a basin that is confined, which means that it artesians. And the challenge here is we have seawater intrusion in storage unit 1. And so what we had saw previously is our chloride starting to tick up in what we call our sentinel wells that basically we have coming from the beach inland. And so we could see the chloride levels coming up in those basins. When we stopped pumping, the basins now started to artesian again. And it's starting to put pressure now and push those salts back out. And so we're seeing those chloride information or data drop. Is it fully recovered? No, it's not back to where it was in 2011, but it certainly has started to reverse that trend. So as we restart those pumps, the salt water will start to make its way back in. Foothill Basin is more like a chalice, a base, like it's a bowl basically. And in that case, we have seen some rebounding of the groundwater, but it's been fairly minor. I don't remember the actual rebound that we've seen there, but we can show that, and we have.
And
graphs on that.
how much lead time do we need if we needed more desal? In other words, there's permitting involved, there's all kinds of logistics, I would assume, that go into that.
There are.
You know,
and do
We
you
thought
have-
this graph might spawn that question.
Commissioner Young, you stole all my questions, 'cause I had all those questions.
Why don't you
I'm
ask?
I'm just wondering whether our August work session, right, we usually do the work session, and yes, you've rolled out your work program for the year, but maybe the fact that we're in this extended drought and we're back in big time, maybe we start looking at that work session, we can start talking about some of these issues, the groundwater recharge, the trigger for desal, the pre-planning area for that, maybe even look out 5 years. Kachuma carryover is carrying us over a couple of years. That's not going to be there in year 4 and 5. But maybe our work session, it's something, these kind of questions, we can have a more in-depth discussion in that regard.
Yeah, it was funny because this is exactly what we wanted to get the conversation started on is, you know, our planning right now is that a desal, additional production capacity, bringing that online will be about 2 years. So we're kind of working with that planning horizon, and next year, if this year remains dry, next year would be that time to start that planning horizon to bring that on. And I think it'd be a great time. I'm happy to entertain that as part of our work session. I think that the challenge we've always had is we've been fairly conservative, and I think would really appreciate the commission's input on, are we too conservative in some of our, you know, estimations, or are we not conservative enough? I don't know.
I don't
We
know.
make a lot of assumptions that we're getting zero from everything.
Proof is in the pudding of how we went through the last portion of the drought. You guys did a really good job. No, you
Yeah.
were not too conservative. You were right, spot on.
Yeah, and I think, you know, what we lose sight of sometimes when we look at these colored bar graphs is that at the end of each of those bars is a rainy season. And we all know, like, we don't have the crystal ball, right? That rainy season's going to produce or it doesn't. And Southern California, it's so flashy. And with climate change, it's even more unpredictable. But this is really between now and when we see this shortage gap, potential shortage gap, we've got 3 rainy seasons. And so even a fairly dry winter like we had today could give us, you know, 2,000 to 3,000 acre feet in Gibraltar, which is immediately usable. So this is definitely what we're seeing on this graph, what our projection is of worst case scenario. In reality, it's probably going to look something different as we go through each of those rainy
Yeah,
seasons.
there's no question. That's true. But we also know that the politics of Kachuma and other things are also variables that we can't control. So there are a lot of variables in that regard. Commissioner Kemmeier.
I wanted to ask too about recycled water production. I know that's been something that we've been looking at trying to increase the demand for. And is that something that you would do, kind of ramp up in response to drought conditions, or what are your thoughts on that?
So we're actually in sort of like full speed ahead right now, working on the recycled water market assessment that we brought to the commission, I believe, in October. And there's been some really great results. We've analyzed all of our customer demands. We're looking at alignments that might be cost effective to make sense to expand availability of the water that we currently produce at the recycled water system. We're also looking at maybe some efficiency improvements in the use of recycled water as processed water down at El Estero, which would make more water available to customers. I wouldn't think enhanced recycled water customer usage would be a drought response option per se, or action per se, but it's definitely something that we know that there's a lot of interest in, and we're analyzing right now, and we hope to come back in September with the results of that study and hopefully some potential uses for more recycled water. Okay, so we're going to transition out of the supply and demand conversation, which is always to be continued. So I'm sure this discussion will continue to be interesting. And now I'm going to go over the history of the governor's actions at the state level regarding the state water drought, and then some of the water board responses to that action. So this isn't a complete summary of all of the action that the governor took in 2021, but it starts with when it starts to affect this Santa Barbara. And so in July 2021 is when the drought state of emergency was extended to include Santa Barbara County, and I believe at that time like 9 other counties. And then also in July 2021, the governor issued an executive order which asked all Californians to voluntarily reduce their water use by 15%. And this is where that 2020 baseline comes into play. And there wasn't, with these orders, any specific water reduction targets or even requirements for urban water suppliers. So this was really kind of a big picture approach, appealing to the public, saying, hey, you know, it's looking dry out there. Can we all just ratchet up our efficiency and reduce our water use by 15%? By October 2021, the dry conditions had continued, and the governor extended the drought state of emergency statewide to pick up all of the counties. In January 2022, in response to the governor's October 2021 action, the Water Board, under Water Code Section 1058.5, which gives them authority to adopt emergency regulations in certain drought years, adopted emergency regulations to supplement voluntary water conservation. And so again, we're talking really high state level. These were actions that included things like, no washing off hard surfaces. And so they were statewide, and they were enforceable by the state board. And there still weren't any specific requirements for urban water suppliers in terms of a water use target or even adopting these actions. So the message from the state was, hey, it's dry out there. We need everybody to kind of be paying attention and starting to use our water resources more efficiently. And then, so that was January. We were kind of like still crossing our fingers that we were going to see some rain. And then we got to March and we didn't really see much. And so the latest executive order from the governor came out in March of 2022, and this is where he directed the Water Board to adopt emergency regulations that really have three main requirements. First is that all urban water suppliers need to submit a draft of our annual water supply and demand assessment 1 month earlier. So it's now due in on June 1st, 2022 instead of July 1st. This is a new requirement. It's associated with the urban water management plans, and it's a 1-year assessment of supply versus demand that we submit every July that basically just says, hey, do we have enough supply to meet demand? And so they're asking us to submit it 1 month earlier, so I think they can get better tabs on, how things are going across the state. They also are requiring urban water suppliers to implement, at a minimum, their shortage response actions from level 2 of their water shortage contingency plans. So our water shortage contingency plans are also related to our urban water management plans. We have to submit them to the Department of Water Resources every 5 years. So we updated ours in 2020 and 2021. It was adopted and submitted in 2021. And basically the water shortage contingency plan helps us define shortages at different stages. And then we have different actions that Water Commission can recommend and Council can adopt to help us drive down demands to meet the delta with the shortage. And then finally, this requirement was a prohibition of irrigation of what they define as non-functional commercial, industrial, and institutional turf grass statewide. And so that's another state level requirement that's enforceable by the Water Board. So the Water Board listened to the governor, and in April 21st, 2022, they released their draft regulations in response to the governor's order. Final adoption of their draft regulations, or final regulations, is expected next week, May 24th, 2022. And the language mimics the governor's executive order. So basically what I described here on this previous slide is what we see in the draft regulations. And the board agenda is now out for that May 24th meeting. And so the draft regulations that were released on April 21st have really not changed. So we anticipate that we know pretty clearly what they're going to adopt next week. But we'll be paying attention to that meeting. So in response, we're gearing up to comply with those draft regulations and the governor's executive order, and staff has drafted a stage 2 water shortage alert. This is just a quick reminder of how our water shortage contingency plan is structured. So on the table on the left, you can see that we have 4 water shortage stages, and then the column on the right shows the percent supply reduction that is associated with each of those stages. And there's just a single percentage listed in that column, but you can really think of it as a range. So water shortage stage 1 could be 0 to 10%. Water shortage stage 2 could be 11 to 25%, et cetera. The way that we designed our water shortage contingency plan is based on all the experience we've had with past droughts, and we know that every drought is different, and that councils are different, and water commissions are different, and the approach we might want to take in one drought might be different than what we want to take in another. And so we really tried to design a lot of flexibility into our water shortage contingency plan. And so what we have is a menu of potential actions that we can choose to adopt to try to drive down demands. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview of that. And I apologize, this is a lot in a table on a slide. This is just a snapshot of the table from our water shortage contingency plan. But what I want to point out is on the left-hand column, you can see the shortage level that each of these actions is assigned to. And you can see in this particular slide that a lot of them say all. So these are basic level actions that we can take. And actually some of them we have year round. So for example, second from the bottom, the post-rainfall prohibition, that says that you shouldn't be irrigating your lawn within 48 hours of measurable rainfall. That's actually in our municipal code. So that's year round regardless of if we're in a drought or not. And then this next slide shows our actions associated with shortage level 2. And most of these actions are really sort of what, it's the governor's language, but I kind of like it, is common sense actions that help us use our water efficiently. So we're not talking about draconian behavior changes necessarily. We're not to a lawn watering ban yet. But these are just ways that we can all pitch in and use our water as efficiently as possible to stretch supplies. So these are the different actions that are associated with stage 2.
Ms. Corey, these were on their packet as well. Was this an attachment?
Yeah, this is an attachment to the car.
To your staff report as well.
Commissioner Young?
So just a general question, why wouldn't we want to implement all actions that just, reduce waste?
So from a staff's perspective, we think that's what we're doing. And then I'm going to show what we're implementing here in just a minute, or what we are suggesting we implement in just a minute. What's tricky for the city of Santa Barbara in this situation is our water supply situation is still really good, and our customers are using water very efficiently. We have 2 years worth of supply sitting in Kachuma. And so we want to be careful about saying the sky is falling when maybe it's not quite falling yet, because people get fatigued from responding to an emergency all the time. We've been responding to COVID emergencies, and there's been wildfires, and that kind of constant emergency response is tiring. So we would really like to encourage our customers to continue to use water efficiently, but not take on the stress of the sky is falling when it's not quite yet here in Santa Barbara. If you have anything to add to that, Mr. Hagmark.
Yeah, I think we need a psychologist on our board, but it's been one of, I think for those who were around before, we definitely felt the drought fatigue, not only at the staff level, but just from the community. And so we're very sensitive to how we communicate this, how that messaging goes, and really the Water Commission this is a critical role for the Water Commission to play, and we're looking for meaningful feedback today. So certainly we'll walk you through what we're proposing, and then we'd be happy to take any input you have into whether we've gone far enough and whether we could go further.
I'll hold my questions until you've completed this then.
Sounds good. Okay, so what are we proposing? Here it is. These are the staff proposed stage 2 water shortage alert actions. And just to point out a little bit of recognition here, the stars are meant to provide information on which items came from the Water Board's January 2022 recommended actions. So those are already implemented statewide but enforceable by the board. And then what came from the city's water shortage contingency plan. And you can see that each of these items has both stars. So we're taking on the same type of action that the state board thinks is important to help us increase our efficiency. And we're also working our plan as described in our water shortage contingency plan. So what are we talking about? We're talking about, so these are prohibited uses of potable water, which means you shouldn't be using a hose without a shutoff nozzle that automatically stops flowing when you're not using it with potable water. Also shouldn't be washing motor vehicles or boats without an end of nozzle shutoff, or end of hose shutoff nozzle. We shouldn't be using running water to clean sidewalks, driveways, buildings, or other hard surfaces. And then irrigation with an in-ground irrigation system should occur between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. And that one's really to reduce loss of water to evaporation and winds. So these are the actions that we're proposing. And I don't know what's the next slide. Oh, this is just a summary of kind of our approach on this water shortage alert. So again, we are not including a specific water reduction target since we're not currently in a water shortage at the city. But we are adjusting the water board's requirements to implement our stage 2 actions, and our actions align with the January 2022 actions that were adopted by the board. And our messaging aligns with the statewide message that we're in a severe drought in California and that we need to use our water resources efficiently. And again, like I described earlier, these are really kind of common sense measures that allow us to use our resources as efficiently as possible. So that might be a good place to pause if there's any feedback on the alert, or we can continue.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Cooney?
So some of these actions or the proposed alert actions, like to me and maybe to everyone on this board, it kind of seems like what a lot of people are already doing, right, in the city of Santa Barbara. Like, do you have any idea of the scope of, I don't know, percent of people in the city that aren't following these suggestions to begin with, or how much of a delta, if there was total adoption, which I know is not the world we live in, right? But like, what is the maximum amount of
benefit.
extra water, that we could kind of squeak out of there? Thank you.
So I don't know that we have a real measurable sense of how much extra water we're going to save with these behaviors. As with everywhere in the state, the real user of water is landscape. And so when we really start to drive down demands is when we start to regulate how people use water in their landscape. And so in the last drought, when we got to conservation levels of 40%, that was when we had a lawn watering ban. I would say that not everybody practices these behaviors currently. A lot of our community does, I think. We do, in terms of like enforcement and sort of customer response, we do get phone calls about, hey, I walk my dog in the morning and there's water running down the sidewalk. And sometimes that's like a broken nozzle that somebody doesn't know about, or maybe sometimes they're like really just having a heyday out there. But so that still does exist in our community. And I think by messaging this as, hey, we all need to be paying attention, we will see an uptick in those types of reports and city response to that behavior.
I think one of the things that we do have going for this time around is our rates. Like, one of the things we were challenged with before is I do not believe we had rates in place that really drove home the message of conservation, and I think now we're in a position where the message is very clear, especially when you get into Tier 3 water usage. It's a pretty hefty price to pay, and then I really think that's changed a lot of permanent behavior related to landscaping. But again, could we do more? Of course we could do. And I think that's really what we're here to talk with the Water Commission about. Is there more that we should be adding into this stage 2? Trying to strike that balance of urgency and need. Last time we were banning fountains. That was part of it. Very, very controversial. But it's symbolic. In many ways, it was symbolic that there's something different going on, and we do not have the water to waste in situations like that, but certainly polarizing in the community, and that could be something that the Water Commission wants to take up.
Commissioner Kemmerer.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Corey. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit. So you had the, on slide 18 are the stage 2 actions, but then on the previous slide were things you said were kind of you were already doing, or that was kind of under all shortage levels. Can you explain, are we increasing efforts on these actions as well, or are we focusing on what's on slide 18?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I was actually going to try to figure out how to slip this in. It's a little bit of a preview of a slide, probably 6 slides from now, but so thank you for giving me that segue because I was trying to figure it out. One of the measures that you see in this list of all actions is providing rebates for turf grass replacement and also providing rebates for landscape irrigation efficiency. So you're going to see that we have a recommended action, which is draft right now, to increase the funding level for our water conservation rebate program, and we're proposing to bring back a new water efficient landscape rebate. And so this will be providing incentives for more efficient irrigation equipment, and then also for the replacement of turf grass with water efficient landscapes. So outside of sort of the regulatory framework of the alerts, but a real life conservation program that we want to offer to our community to incentivize better usage of our water resources.
Commissioner Keller.
Yeah, it seems to me that, I understand the issue of fatigue that you mentioned, that, we've messaged this all the time, people are not going to respond. But on the other hand, we have this tier 3 customers who clearly have not yet gotten the message. And so who maybe we should focus the attention of the campaign. And even though we may or may not declare stage 2 droughts anytime soon, messaging to that particular group would be useful. And, not because everybody gets electronic bills, they may not see it, but something that will let them get with recommendations as to what things they can do and should be doing to reduce their use, and maybe a comparison of what their use is to their neighbors, and that's always, very useful.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kammeier.
Thanks. Yeah, I had another or a kind of series of questions around enforcement. So, one, I was wondering if there's proposed increased budget for enforcement, and then two, you mentioned for the non-functional turf ban on CII that was going to be enforceable by the state board. I don't really know what that means, and I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit to that.
Okay. We also have Ms. Wood, our water conservation analyst, here today too, so I might have her jump up and help with this. But in terms of enforcement, we really look for direction from Water Commission and Council on what we want enforcement to look like. In terms of how things work in California, it can range anywhere from sort of water cops that are out patrolling, looking for specific infractions against these regulations, to more of as city staff are out in the community doing their regular work, they can report it, and other customers can report things that they're seeing in the community. In the past, the direction we've received is that we don't really want to go with like the water cop mentality, but we're open to direction. Do you want to add anything, Ms. Wood?
So our enforcement has really been complaint-based, as Ms. Corey said, where we have a variety of ways that customers can get a hold of us. We have hotline, we've got an online reporting because pictures are very helpful. We have a lot of avid early morning joggers and bike riders who see a lot of irrigation issues and can take pictures and let us know. And then the fortunate thing is our enforcement is really more about education. So we have a lot of carrots because a lot of folks are not aware that they have an irrigation issue, something's broken, something's been twisted. And so we're able to offer them support and help to curtail that usage and fix the issue rather than it being really punitive. And that's something that we're really proud of. So throughout the last drought, we were able to get compliance through education, and we didn't have to levy any fines. And that's something that we're proud of, and we're hoping to continue.
Going to the question though, in the draft resolution, in the fifth whereas, it says that the prohibition of this non-functional turf is enforceable by the water board. It specifically says that, and I know in some discussion, it has been essentially it's a state enforceable item, not local. Any comment?
Yeah, and that's something that we're open to recommendations on. So that's how staff has written the draft resolution currently. But if there was, a strong call from Water Commission and Council to enforce that locally, we have the ability to do so through the municipal code. We would just have to write it into the resolution. Any other thoughts on that one?
We have not heard a lot of information about how the state plans to enforce that. That's something that we've, throughout our member agencies, has been talking to the state board and trying to get more information from them on that, because I know that's something that all water providers share a concern of, is if we're spreading the message about this and trying to talk to customers, what happens with the compliance part of that, and how is it going to be enforced? So that's something that a lot of us share questions about in California, and perhaps on Tuesday we'll learn more.
Go back, let Cora continue, and I'll come over to Commissioner Keller.
Yeah, I was just going to say too, it seems like there's an opportunity to pair that ban, assuming that it goes into effect next week, with some of the bringing back the landscaping rebates. I mean, of course, in some cases banning irrigation is necessary, but it would be great if instead of having dead lawns, we just had more sustainable landscaping.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We could definitely pair the messaging around those two items. That's a good suggestion.
Commissioner Keller.
Yeah, going to the education, I think a lot of the decisions in irrigation are actually made by the landscaping companies that, they're the ones that really, in most places, make decisions as to how they're going to switch the irrigation on and to what levels, no? So education to them, I don't know, I know we do some, but what more we could do in terms of messaging very, very strongly that they need to talk to their customers about the need to sort of cut back and how to do that, because it's a difficult conversation. They want to keep the place nice, and yet they need to cut back. So how do we do that? No?
Commissioner Young?
I believe I've seen a much expanded Stage 2 action item table, right? There was a link to that, I think.
There's an attachment to your
Right.
staff report that has the entire table,
Yeah.
but that is all of the stage 2 actions in our water shortage contingency plan. Then we go into stage 3 and stage 4, so the table is bigger, but those are all the stage 2 actions.
Okay, I thought there were more Stage 2, but I can't find it. Looked at it. What might be helpful. Okay, that's where it is.
Stage all and
Right, that's where I saw it. Okay, in the okay. Do you guys have a table that shows all these action items and what is currently being implemented, what you're proposing now, and then what, remains for consideration? Is there something like that?
There isn't currently, but that would be easy to prepare.
Yeah, because it would be great for discussion to see what's left, even if it's Stage 3.
Sure.
But if it addresses pure waste, and to
Okay.
me, offering people water at a restaurant that don't ask for it and that may not drink it, even though might be a small amount of water, it's still wasting water. The same with the,
And then washing it, right?
right,
Because you still have to.
you still have to then wash the glass and everything. I think it's kind of a mindset that we just need to continue to instill and keep permanent. But anyway, a table like that would help me if I was, making decisions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll continue.
Yeah, let's go on. So here I just want to summarize some of the additional actions that staff is implementing with the understanding that we are going into what's going to be dry and hot summer after kind of a low rainfall year. So on the demand reduction side, as we've kind of alluded to or even discussed now, we want to continue to implement our water conservation program, which has been largely successful. And as I mentioned earlier, we want to increase our funding for the water conservation rebate program specifically so that we can include a new residential and commercial landscape rebate program. And we learned a lot. We had a very successful program during the last drought, but we learned a lot, and so we've really kind of revamped it so that we think it's going to be, one, cost effective, and two, easy to implement and to administer. So we're pretty excited about what that new program looks like. So this would be a recommendation that we would be asking to move forward at next Water Commission's meeting, but again, we're just asking for increased expenditures for fiscal year 2022 from the Water Operating Fund reserves to increase available funding for the city's water conservation rebate program.
Ms. Flessy reminded me that we are reaching out because we're changing the cap for wastewater, lowering that. We are going to be reaching out to all customers using 10 HCF or more to let them know that that's occurring. And so part of that message will be, lower your wastewater bill, lower your water bill, and if you need help, let us know. So we will be reaching out, but that isn't necessarily targeted at our Tier 3 users, which we'll take that into consideration, figure out if there's another message there.
I would love to learn more about the landscape rebate program, and maybe Ms. Woods wants to speak to that. I was great to read and hear that in the last drought there were 1,500 landscapes converted. That's amazing. And yeah, I would just love to hear more detail on that. How much the rebate is, whether there's any stormwater capture components included. I know we've talked about that before, and that requires collaboration with Creeks Division. And then also money for rebates is great, but I'm wondering if there's additional funding for outreach about the rebates.
Thank you, Commissioner Kameyer. So we are sort of anticipating a stacked rebate is the way we're looking at it. So we have, I'm trying to remember what we called them. So it's called Beautiful Basics and Watershed Works. So the Beautiful Basics would be removing watered turf grass and putting in low water use plants and drip irrigation, which is basically what our last rebate was. We started in the last rebate to also rebate on cobbles and things that were dry creek bed and rainwater adjacent. But that beautiful basics would be $1 a square foot, and a cap would be $750 for a single family home, and it would be twice that for a commercial property. And then the watershed works would be a higher cap, so it would be $1,000 for a single family home or $2,000 for a commercial property. And that's if you replace turf grass with low water use plants and drip irrigation, but additionally you have a stormwater capture from your gutters. Generally, we're looking at the ability of possibly having a cistern that then discharges into a rain garden, but having gutters with a downspout that redirects into that portion of the garden. So it's that extra incentive to use a non-potable, source of additional water for your garden. And that would be the higher approach. And then we're planning to have just irrigation rebates, sort of a la carte irrigation. Some people already have low water use shrubs or plants, and they have a pop-up sprinkler system. So we would have rebates for rotating nozzles that are more efficient nozzles, for drip conversions, for smart irrigation controllers, and pressure reducing valves, and that's sort of the a la carte options as well. And mulch, we always rebate on mulch, and we have existing rebates for flume sensors and Rachio smart controllers as well. And I think you had one other question in there. I'm trying to remember what it is.
Oh, funding for outreach.
Oh, for outreach. So we do have a decent outreach budget, which we tend to just pivot. We have seasonal outreach. Right now it's 4 a.m. Do you know what your sprinklers are doing type of messaging, because they come on when we sleep. So it's night vision goggles running around the garden. So we tend to just have spring, summer, fall campaigns, and we can replace irrigation messaging with messaging specific to the landscape rebate. Also countywide, we are trying to get a U.S. Bureau of Reclamation grant to have a countywide rebate, which is how our last rebate started in 2009. And so if there's multiple agencies having the same rebate program, we can band together on some of that messaging.
That's great. Thank you.
We are planning, Ms. Wood has been working to try and arrange a meeting with Creek's staff to talk about potentially using Measure B money, which is money specifically for stormwater projects to go towards this rain gardens. That's a win-win, hopefully, that ultimately gets water into the ground for trees particularly, and then of course has the added benefit of helping out with storm runoff and pollutants in it. So we're hoping we can team up on that. We think that would be a good combo for the community.
Thank you. It would be great at some point to bring some Creeks folks in to have that conversation with the commission. I would enjoy that.
All right, so then on the water supply side, I did allude to some of this earlier when we were looking at our stacked bar graphs, but we are going to commence groundwater pumping from Storage Unit 1 in August 2022. So those are the wells that feed the Ortega groundwater treatment plant. As Mr. Hagmark mentioned, that groundwater basin is artesianing right now, and it seems like a good way to meet some high summer demands and stretch our supplies that are stored at Kachuma. We are also in the process of constructing a pipeline that will connect the Alameda well in Storage Unit number 1 to the Ortega groundwater treatment plant so that we can utilize the water from that well. We talked about this in March, but we're working with the Central Coast Water Authority to secure up to 2,000 acre-feet of supplemental water purchases. At this time, we're working out the details on 2 different agreements, one with Casitas Municipal Water District and one with Mojave Water Agency. So we've got about 800 acre-feet of water coming in currently under those agreements. And then we are going to comply with the new requirement to submit our draft water supply and demand assessment 1 month early by the June 1st deadline, which again, as you've seen with the graphs today, it just shows that we have surplus supply to meet demands. They're only asking us to look out to June 2023. So obviously our internal planning goes much further than that. And this is a piece of water code that I wanted to share with you to sort of contextualize the work that staff has been doing at kind of the state level and almost like the political sphere. And so this gives direction to the water board in terms of how much, what am I trying to say? How much they should defer to local agencies in enacting what they've already adopted in their water shortage contingency plans. So I don't want to read all of the sort of, legislative language here, but I've highlighted at the bottom that the board should defer to implementation of the locally adopted water shortage contingency plans to the extent practicable. And the reason I bring this up is in the city of Santa Barbara, and we're not the only city, we're actually working, which I'll share here in a second, with a coalition of water agencies across the state. Because our supply situation is pretty secure right now, these top-down regulatory actions from the state take away our ability to work our plans that we've worked really hard to design, and to have efficient and accurate communication with our communities that builds trust and gets the action we want from them when we need it. And so we've been meeting at different levels with state representatives. We met with representatives from Senator Limon's office and State Representative Bennett's office on May 11th, and that was a really productive meeting where we just kind of educated them on water supplies in Santa Barbara and how that works and what that looks like in the greater state legislative sphere. And we are commenting on the draft water board regulations that are going to be adopted next week. That letter actually just went out this morning. And then we're a co-signer of a group that's organized itself called the Stress Test Coalition. And what they're asking is that these draft regulations that we expect to be adopted next week are edited to say that if a water agency can show that they have enough supply to meet demands, the adoption of the stage 2 actions is voluntary versus mandated. And there are many, many water agencies just like Santa Barbara that have invested a lot in expanding their water supply portfolio. So for drought-proof supplies, and then also investing in conservation. And we want to make sure that the state recognizes those actions and the efforts of our community to stretch our supplies. And so we're just continuing that conversation so that our sort of the efforts of our community don't go unseen. And I believe, one more slide. Did you have anything to say? Okay. So this is just our timeline, next steps. We're here today doing a review and recommendations on the proposed water shortage alert and sort of the context of where we're operating from. On May 24th, as I've mentioned many times, the state board is expected to adopt their final regulations. On June 16th, we'll be back at Water Commission, and at that time, we'll be looking from you for recommendations that we would take to council on June 21st. So we anticipate that that would be the date that council would adopt our stage 2 water supply alert. And then we're really heading into the summer. So we will be supplying our customers with the water they need and monitoring our water supply and conditions. If there's any additional regulatory action from the state, we would bring that back for your consideration. And then in November, kind of per our regular timeline, that's the end of the water year, we'll do our next water supply outlook. And then we're crossing our fingers for the next rainy season. Can never look ahead too much there.
Great, thank you so much for the presentation. I will see if there are any other questions or comments from the board at this point. Anybody else? Madam Clerk, is there any public comment for the record?
There's no public comment
Okay,
at this
No public
time.
comment for the record. So, if I'm correct, basically, we will be the Thursday before it goes to council next time. Okay. And there's no action required today. It's just a review and recommendations. Any further comment before I close this item? Okay, not seeing any. I'll close the item. Thank you very much for the presentation and the response to questions that we've had. That takes us on then to, I believe, our Water Resources Manager's report, Mr. Hagmark.
Yeah, let me just start off with some high-level stuff. CCWA has been working to get renew its WARN Act contract. So WARN Act is what allows us to pass and store water in Cachuma. And we've known for a long time that contract has been coming to an end, and have been working tirelessly to try to get the Bureau to move on that. And they haven't, and they haven't. And then finally they said, you know what, we need an extension. Okay, well, extensions, because it does expire on June 21st, something like that. So they had put out the environmental docs to just extend the contract for 2 years, and NIMS has taken issue with extending the contract for 2 years, and has created this quagmire right now where if we cannot get it passed, we will not be able to take deliveries of any state water into Kachuma, which will create a huge issue for La Cumbra and Goleta and Carpinteria, who are critically relying on the delivery of state water. Certainly, we're out there purchasing close to $2 million worth of supplemental water and plan to use that system. But yeah, I'm sharing that with you because I'm extremely frustrated. CCWA has been pushing this along and been due diligent, and it unfortunately has not been reciprocated, and now we're in this quagmire. Hopefully the Bureau will step up and sign the contract and face the issues that may come of that. But extending an agreement for 2 years does not seem like a big issue. And what NIMS has been asking for, and it may sound minor, but they do not want any state water to mix during downstream releases, which on the surface, because way back when we were talking about bringing state water in, Lompoc and the downstream users had brought a lawsuit against the Kachuma project because they believed that it increased the salts in the river. And so as a mitigation, when we do downstream releases, we blend, and there's a ratio to this because you do not want to have this dominant scent of state water that would confuse the steelhead. There is a blending that occurs, and that was the way we mitigated this issue with Lompoc and downstream users. And so to just stop that, the downstream users made it very clear they will take legal action if that blending does not occur. Again, downstream users typically do their releases August through November. So we could always pump the water. We've done this before up and over the dam. It's not ideal. It does restrict how much we can push into the lake, a little more energy to do it, but we can do that. But this threat of litigation from the downstream users. So all of this is setting up for a great conversation that needs time to develop and do the environmental work associated with it, and not something we should be talking about for a short-term extension. But anyway, I'm bringing that to you all. That's fresh discussions with CCWA, and we're currently scrambling right now to resolve this issue before our contract expires.
Who's our council rep there? Mr. Friedman?
Mr. Friedman, yes. Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, Cora.
That's okay, I know, it's hard to see you. I was just wondering if you could clarify, so NIMS doesn't want State Water Project being released downstream because it's gonna confuse steelhead? Is that the?
That's what I understand to be the premise with there. And there was lots of good conversation when this came up initially, and that's why there's a blending that needs to go on. There's a temperature and a blending criteria that needs to be met, so that the dominant scent in the water is not state water. I guess that's the way to describe it. However, it seems that the needle has moved for NIMS, and they don't want any blending of state water when those releases are done.
And does that then have an effect on the flows and temperature if there's no state water in that, or is it kind of sufficient without it?
Flows, not a problem. Temperature, I mean, it's pretty closely, usually when we do releases, they're from the bottom of the lake, so that's typically the colder water. And I do know that sometimes is a challenge with state water. It can be fairly warm. So I don't know that it was an added benefit in that sense.
What's the temperature difference between cold and warm? Like, not as a sarcastic.
For a fish? I don't, that's a great question. Because that, has to do with oxygen, right, in the water, how much
Right.
oxygen can be held in it. And I don't
Do
know
we know?
that.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. It's very, let me just tell you, it's very well defined in the contract because we do monitor for it. CCWA and COMB monitor for it. All right. So with that, we can turn to our graphic here, and I just wanted to point out a few things that just it just kind of comes through in the presentation. Let's see if you can see this. So we're looking at our total water system here, and you can see month over month we've been, we have our planned, and then our actual delivered, and except for what's this, February and March, we've been pretty consistently under our planned use of water. So that's been looking really positive. The other one that I want to point out is just, our planned use of Kachuma, what we're actually using, and then what we're making it up with is Gibraltar water here. So I just thought those are some items to kind of point out. Let's see, was there anything in here? I think we're right on target with what our planned and actual, pretty close. I don't know that there's anything in these graphics that I wanted to point out. Recycled water is looking good. We did budget, I do have to say this, we put it into the budget for next year to replace the membranes. We've gotten about 7 years now on those membranes, and we've been trying to stretch them as far as we can. We think we're getting there, and so we've budgeted $1.5 million to replace those membranes, and so there will be some downtime with that, but I'm told we can minimize that and hopefully try not to hit peak summer demands. I don't know if there's any other questions there. I'll skip to the graphic everybody wants to talk about. The COVID RNA testing, and I think this is the latest sample. We did have a really high hit was that 2 weeks ago, I guess, and this last week it's come down, but it certainly is prevalent in the community. We've had some staff diagnosed at work, and we've been watching it very carefully. Kind of hopefully it's in its death throes, and we're just seeing various spikes again, but it doesn't appear to be equating to hospitalizations, which I think is probably the most important thing out of all this. But I will be highlighting this in my budget presentation next week with council, just about how, the leadership of Water Commission, who has insisted on kind of moving forward with this, but just where this is taking us. We've always prided ourselves on protection of public health and the environment. That's what we do in water resources. But where this kind of work can take us with diagnosing other issues in our communities is really exciting. Hopefully funding will come with it someday, but I think there's a lot of interesting science going on here, and the staff are really excited about being part of that. And with that, I'm available for any questions.
Great, thanks. Any questions here? Not seeing any. Thank you for the report, Mr. Hagmar. Look forward to seeing where this all goes in that regard. Okay, is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak before we adjourn? Not seeing any. We will stand adjourned at 10:09. Our next meeting will be June 16th, 9 a.m., right back here in David Gebhard room. Thank you all for everything you did today, and thank you for attending.